Should vaccines be mandatory? Well, it's a debate that's been raging this week here in the UK right now as I speak to you in December 2021 at the rise of the COVID Omicron variant. It touches at the nerves of health, medicine, society and your rights as a human being. Now, who am I to tell you this? Well, I'm Dan, I'm a doctor, and part of my job is on the front line with COVID, which doesn't really make me very special because pretty much every doctor's doing that these days. But I've also done a bit of work in public health and infectious disease. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today are actually old debates, which have been brought right into the forefront for everyone now by this pandemic. Now, some of you will have really strong opinions about this, but the fact is the area is ethically grey. So today, let's look at vaccines and look at both sides of whether they should or should not be mandatory. Is it in the best interests of public health, or is it a total violation of your human rights? To start with, just a quick word about vaccines themselves. I'm sure you all kind of know what they are. A therapy to stop you getting disease or to stop you getting the disease badly. There are lots of different kinds of vaccines, and some will work for you for your whole life and others will work for a little bit and then they'll run out and need to be boosted. COVID looks like it's going to be one of those latter diseases, partly because of the way it interacts with your immune system and partly because of the way the virus adapts over time, i.e. new variants. Now, it's hard to play down just how amazing vaccines are. Aside from clean water, they are probably the single most effective health measure humans have ever invented. They have cured disease, and I'm talking about horrible diseases like smallpox, and they've turned upsetting, life-changing disabilities into manageable morsels. So think paralysis or, a slight headache for a couple of days. In terms of COVID, many people see the vaccine as the way out. It will stop people dying, it will stop people getting sick, and it allows our economies and infrastructure to open up again. But there are issues, and to understand this, I want you to try and look at things from 2 points of view. So the first is a detached public health point of view, looking at the population from afar with an almost emotionless mindset. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And then also from your individual, your personal self. My health, my family's health is more important than anyone else's. Because if you see things from those two areas, you begin to see where the debate comes in. On the one hand, vaccines are amazing because they prevent disease, and they actually prevent disease in people who can't have the vaccine. For example, if, you have some kind of horrible blood cancer and you cannot have a vaccine, then if enough people around you are vaccinated, the disease can't get through to you. That's what we mean by herd immunity. Herd immunity is not what you might have heard at the beginning of the pandemic in the UK, but we're going to come back to media bias and media misinformation later on. You probably need about 90% of the population to be vaccinated for herd immunity to work. So vaccinations are great, but some vaccinations do have side effects. You've all had minor ones like a sore arm after a jab, but some side effects are major. You might have heard of the blood clots on the brain from the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine. Well, very smart people looked into this and realized that the benefits outweighed the risks significantly. But this is a really good example of the two mindsets we were talking about earlier. From a population point of view, it's totally worth it. In the UK, the vaccine program to date has probably stopped about 25 million infections and prevented about 110,000 deaths. So when you weigh up 110,000 against the 74 people who died from blood clots, well, the benefits outweigh the risks. But you might be more scared of a blood clot than COVID. Maybe that's because of the media, maybe it's because you don't think COVID will affect you that badly, or maybe you think that a blood clot on the brain is worse than 1,000 tiny blood clots in the lungs. I don't know. But you can see that you are beginning to make an internal risk assessment as well. And far be it for me to patronize anyone, but I don't think most people understand the complexities of what risk really is. But that's an education issue. And again, we're going to come back to education. Let's now talk a little bit about vaccine hesitancy. Now, despite the fact that vaccine programs have been proven effective to decrease a number of nasty childhood diseases, there is a rising trend of parents refusing to vaccinate their children, and that's now spilling over into the adult population with COVID. Now, these people are somewhat disparagingly referred to as anti-vaxxers, and there are probably three things behind the anti-vax mindset. Number one, the vaccines cause sickness. Number two, they were introduced unethically. And number three, uncertainty as to whether they work or not. I think there are probably two groups of anti-vaxxers. There's the staunch anti-vaxxer, a bit like a flat earther. It's not even worth talking to these people. They are totally closed off from reason, but they are the tiny, tiny minority. And then there's the majority, those who are vaccine hesitant. They're influenced by those reasons from earlier, but part of them is open to hearing arguments. But to have those arguments, we do need two things. We need time and education, two things which I think are lacking these days. Now, every country is different, but in the UK, we've tended to let people make their own choice. We are a liberal, democratic country that prides itself on individuality. So we've tended to do big public health campaigns that explain the benefits of something like a vaccine. And until relatively recently, the news was just TV and newspapers. It was long-form media. And doctors were pretty paternalistic. We told you what to do. And, we were given respect and status in society. So it was much easier to get a clear message out that was reinforced along the way. But in the last 15 years, there's been some pretty significant societal changes. These things, well, they didn't exist, and now they do, and they control our lives. There's information from 1,000,001 places. There's fake news, there's bubbles, which means you're not open to other sources of information, and our attention spans have decreased significantly. Whereas before you had to read an article, now you just read a headline or look at a picture. And as journalism quality becomes worse and headlines become more clickbaity, you can see how misinformation spreads. And even when they do try to do the right thing, I have to say the quality of scientific reporting during this pandemic has probably been some of the worst reporting I've ever seen, to the extent where the media are probably responsible for tens of thousands of deaths. But you know what? That's a video for another time. But in addition to all of this, the respect for healthcare workers has dissipated. It's the default to question or ignore experts rather than to believe them. Trust in the government has never been lower, and dull corporate-looking but important public health messages are being lost in a sea of bling and blang. And of course, if I'm personally going to explain all this science to you, it's going to take me about half an hour to get you through it. And you know what? No one's got time for that. So time and education, I just don't think we have them. So this pulls our debate on whether we should mandate them. Should we make vaccines compulsory? The thinking being, you know what, you won't understand this, it's way too complicated for you, but the people who do know, well, you know what, they do the right thing and they know what's right, so let's just do it. But then we get into a whole debate about human rights. You're still with me? Good, because now we're getting into the nitty-gritty. I'll talk about things predominantly from a UK bias, but most of this is totally applicable to your country as well. In 2020, the UK government passed the Coronavirus Act, which gives the government the power to take drastic action to stop the spread of COVID. So that's lockdowns, isolation, school closures, and so on. But you could argue that that interferes with an individual's right to liberty under Article 5.1 of the European Convention on Human Rights, the ECHR. The battle comes at whether you can deprive someone's liberty to prevent the spread of a disease, i.e. stay at home for 10 days. This deprivation has to be necessary and proportionate. So the crux of the argument is whether having a compulsory COVID vaccine is a violation of your human rights in a way which is not necessary and not proportionate. Now, we've already spoken about vaccine hesitancy, and in recent years, cases of measles, mumps and rubella have gone up significantly. These are three horrible diseases which can be easily prevented with the MMR vaccine. It seems people have lost confidence in that in recent years. And not only does it affect the kid, and you know what, there's a debate about whether the parent should be allowed to choose for the kid when it's not in their best interests, but it also breaks herd immunity. Because of this, Italy and France have made the MMR vaccine compulsory. In the US, you cannot attend public or private schools unless you've had it. And in Australia, there's a financial incentive for you to have the vaccine. So you can already see that there is a precedent for introducing it along a spectrum of completely compulsory through to not compulsory, but pretty much encouraged compulsory. So the key here is that governments have taken this decision to protect the kids and to protect those that can't have the vaccine. From a public health perspective, this appears to clearly be the way forward. But what's the flip on the other side of the coin? Well, does having the vaccine interfere with Articles 8 and 9 of the ECHR? That is your right to respect for privacy and family life, and that of freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Basically, what we're saying is that people should have reasonable control over actions in which they partake and what happens to their body. Disallowing this is a violation of these rights. But there is an ECHR guide on these articles which gives exceptions if 1. It's lawful, 2. It's in the interest of national security, public safety and the economic well-being of the country and the rights and freedoms of others, and 3. The interference is necessary in a democratic society. Then it's okay. Personally, I think the first two are pretty easy to satisfy. It would be lawful and it would certainly be in the benefit of the public interest and their health and the country's economy. But the third is a bit trickier. Is it necessary in a democratic society? Emphasis on necessary. Are there alternatives to vaccination which achieve the same goals yet are less intrusive on people's rights? For example, lockdowns. Is there a middle ground? For example, making it compulsory for people from high-risk areas like education and health and voluntary for the general public. What level of risk are you willing to accept? And what's your metric for success? Deaths in the short term versus deaths in the long term? Economy versus lives? It's a reasonable conclusion that the legal basis for making vaccines compulsory is there. And the science shows that it would probably be the most effective and beneficial measure that we could take. But it does throw up other problems. We've often done things with a soft nudge rather than a hard one, so asking people to do something rather than telling them. Does mandating it erode trust in government and healthcare, two areas where we really shouldn't chip away at in the pandemic? How do you enforce it? Fines? Arrest people? Get the armed forces in? Can you afford to break down society in an already fragile time? This isn't just a public health issue. And then as a scientist, the only thing you can say for sure is that you don't know everything about anything. Do we know everything about these vaccines, their effectiveness and their long-term impacts? I mean, we have a good idea, but we don't know everything. Do we have the analysis infrastructure in place to constantly monitor the evidence and make the necessary changes in a totally transparent way? And to what criteria do we measure success? Because I'm pretty sure every single person in the world will have a slightly different opinion about what the right thing to do with COVID is. Is there a sufficient supply of vaccines to mandate it properly? Probably not, especially worldwide. And you really do need to vaccinate the entire world if you want to kick a pandemic up the arse. Is there trust? And trust goes both ways. Would you trust a state that made you do things? And if it makes you do this, what's it going to make you do next? But equally, can the state trust you to do the right thing? And that circles all the way back to education and attention span. Is society clued up and educated enough to make the right decision? Well, if you've made it to this part of the video, then congratulations, you have a better attention span than 99% of people out there, and this video wasn't even 15 minutes long, so what does that tell you? Anyway, I'd love to know your thoughts because this is a real hot area for debate, so please get involved in the comments, share your views and thoughts nicely if you can, and do me a favour and like and subscribe when you're there as well. There's a ton of links about this in the description below if you want to read more. Well, that was pretty heavy, wasn't it? So here's a video about how to not get a hangover.